Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Chad here with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today we got another Gun Gripe episode for you. And these are the types of videos that I hate making the most. I hate making these types of videos. I absolutely do. But I really do want to talk about the recent school shooting in Nashville because there's a lot of information coming out about it, and there's a lot of things that we can learn and take from it. And it's such a tragedy. I mean, I hate to see these types of events because it's always terrible to deal with loss. And we hate to see situations where a shooter carries out a heinous, terrible act of evil. You know what I mean? And that's all this is pure evil. And as we dive deeper into this video, I think you'll see that there's a lot of information that you're probably going to want to know. And we're going to try to be as respectful and direct as we can. And I hope that you'll join us for this discussion and maybe comment below and let us know what you think about things that are going on. But it's definitely a tragedy, and our hearts go out to the families of the people, affected and everything like that. And in this situation, 3 children were killed, 3 adults were killed, and the police did end the threat and stop the shooter. The shooter did die, so that's 7 people total with the shooter. And it's a very terrible series of events, and it really paints a very tragic picture that we'll try to unravel as we get into today's gun gripe. But a terrible situation, especially for a Christian school. And this was just such a terrible, terrible, terrible event. I cannot, make that distinction enough that we really hate to see these types of things happening. But you always have to wonder, is there something we can learn? Is there something we can take away from it? What can we take from this and turn it into, maybe a learning situation? Well, for one, we are going to get into this in more detail. But the law enforcement response was textbook, and we are going to get into the way that was handled. So, look, the law enforcement up there in Nashville, look, you guys did a freaking great job. We're not going to show the footage out of respect for the identities of everybody involved, but the law enforcement response was textbook, and we'll get into that. But there's definitely a lot of very scary situations going on in our country and some very mentally unstable people in our country, and it's very, very unsettling, Chad, to see these types of things going on.
Look, I think I'm gonna have to lay out some ground rules and just some prerequisites, okay? Because that's how I am. All right, you guys know we've done this before with the Pulse nightclub shooting. Yeah, from a 2A and gun rights perspective, we support everybody, but on a personal level, I'm a family man, so obviously I'm going to disagree with some of these movements and things, right?
Sure.
And we're probably going to misgender some people in this video, so, I'm sorry, but, we're going to talk about biology because the shooter was a female, all right? They changed the headline several times. Initially it started out as, a teenager shot up the school, and then it went to a woman shot up the school, and then it was a transgender that shot up the school, and then it's a person that shot up the school. And initially Christian was in the title, and then they removed Christian from the title, so all the hot keywords were gone, trying not to piss anybody off. That's how our news system works. They'll change the headline all throughout the day when this
to
news
meet
is
whatever
breaking.
narrative they're trying to push.
Yes, exactly. And it's a sensitive subject, all right? A transgender man, a biological female, shoots up a Christian school, and part of the reporting was that she was a former student there. So you're trying to wrap someone's entire life, 28-year-old person, their entire life up into a few news articles. It's impossible to do. So what happened to this person? What led them to this point? There is definitely a mental issue in this country. They're mentally unstable people, like you mentioned, and we are not caring for them, and we are not reading the signs early enough, and as a family man, I see my kids every day. We homeschool. We do not send them to public school. Maybe one day I'll send them to private school. I don't know. But right now we homeschool, and it's the best thing I think we could have ever done. I see my kids all the time. I know my kids. They are all very different people, right? And, you have movements in this country on both sides of the aisle, on the extreme right and on the extreme left, pushing for transgender and LGBTQ ideals be put in the public sphere more, and then you got people on the other side that are 100% wholly against it, and they are just constantly fighting. And then you got everybody else who's in the middle, like us. I mean, we're mostly centrists, right?
I agree.
Okay? But you got stable, level-minded people that are just trying to get through life and try to make sense of these things that happen. And you got people screaming from the left, oh, we need more assault weapons bans, gun bans. Oh, they use these type of guns. We got to get these things off the streets. And you got people from this side blaming, oh, it's a transgender person. And it's just the other extreme. And neither should be setting an example of what you should be like in these kind of situations at all. And like I feel horrible for the conservatives that are coming out of the woodwork now and just being such hypocrites about the situation.
I agree. We always get upset when generalizations are made about someone that looks like me. Let's just put it that way, all right? A guy
you are pretty pasty.
I mean, okay, I'm your average white dude, right? I mean, like someone looks like me. We hate for someone to paint a picture of, well, now all people that look like me and come from my background are all the same because one person decided to carry out an heinous act of violence. So I think in respects to, let's just say, moral consistency and logical consistency, you can't paint the entire transgender community in the same light. Just because one transgender person committed this terrible act of violence doesn't mean that all transgender people are bad. Doesn't mean that all LGBT, whatever, that community of people are bad people. And I just think it's important to not throw people under the bus unnecessarily, right? We wouldn't want those generalizations being made about us. So I'm not going to sit here and paint generalizations about others. I have a lot of transgender followers on Twitter, right? And a lot of them are pretty freaking based people. Like they're freedom-loving people just like you and I, and they're responsible and they work hard and that's their lifestyle. And who am I to judge someone by their lifestyle? But when we look at the entirety of the situation, it is terrible. I mean, you have to ask yourself a lot of questions, right? I mean, was this girl bullied in school, perhaps? I mean, did she have a rough time? I'm not saying that it's justification, of course, for carrying out these terrible acts, but one has to ask themselves, when you look at Columbine and the events of Columbine, like those kids, at some point were bullied, you know what I mean? So this bullying in school and things, I mean, that can go both directions, right? Depending on the makeup of the school and the demographics of the school. What's so interesting about a school is a school is really just a microcosm of society. I mean, think about it, right? In society, you have good people, you have bad people, you have ugly people, beautiful people, smart people, dumb people, black people, white people, and everything in between. You have Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever your persuasion is. They're all in that mixing pot in the school. Now, unless it's a Christian school or a specific private school that caters to a certain specific demographic of kids or whatever, like this Christian school was. It's terrible to think that parents who want their kids to grow up in that environment and to be taught those ideals and those conservative Christian ideals in a safe, conservative Christian environment, now, 3 of these children are not going home. And that's scary, right? And 3 adults, probably trying to protect the kids, perished as well. And that's terrible. We should always try to find ways to avoid these situations from occurring. Now, the police took about 15 minutes to respond, but the response time is what it is, and I'm not going to say whether that's par for the course or not, but I think the police response was pretty good. I did see the body cam footage of the unit that responded to the shooter, and I must say, it kind of brought back some memories for me because, I mean, these guys were absolutely on their A game. They did not play around. They did a wonderful job of going into the school in a methodical, fast, tactical, safe manner, and they absolutely ended the threat in the most professional way possible. So hey, I must say, they did a fantastic job.
So what I read was like 15 minutes response time, but it was 15 minutes from the call to ending the threat. So there was the one report I saw, the times were unknown as far as when they arrived, entered the school, and such as that. But from call to ending the threat, 15 minutes, which is pretty fast.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if we compare that to something like Uvalde,
Oh, boy.
1 hour and 14 minutes in Uvalde until even the door of the school was breached. So a lot more people and kids perished, adults and kids perished in that shooting.
Well, one positive that we can take away, if you could ever call it a positive, but one silver lining you can take from this is that maybe in the future, these law enforcement agencies can take this video and learn from it and go, hey, how can we better improve our tactics? But beyond tactics, response time, the absolute best response time is a teacher with a dang gun. All right.
And gun-free zones.
And in gun-free zones. And we've tried to say this over and over again, and I feel like we're talking to a brick wall. I feel like we're talking to people who aren't listening. But Chad and I have been making these videos for over 15 years, and I've been involved in the 2A space for over 2 decades. All right. And I've been telling people for 2 decades that gun-free zones are just murder zones. They're just places where is going to create a soft target and allow a person who wants to carry out evil to carry out evil. And that's exactly what happened. This shooter left behind a manifesto, a detailed manifesto, giving a lot of information about potential targets, the equipment they were going to use, the layout, maps, everything. So this paints a picture of a person who's obviously very mentally deranged. You're talking a premeditated shooting. This wasn't just some random act of violence. This was methodically and carefully planned out by this person. And according to the Nashville police chief, he actually came out and said that the manifesto included some other locations like a mall and such, and that the shooter actually attempted to go to another school, but chose not to attack that location because of the strict security measures in place. Well, that should tell you everything you need to know right there. That writing is on the wall right there already, right? We know that armed teachers provide a hard target, that school resource officers provide a hard target, and that a shooter is not going to go into a situation where he knows he's going to meet resistance, he or she or whoever. They're going to go into a situation that offers the least resistance and has the softest targets and allows them to carry out their plans unopposed. That is a fact. And that is the real tragedy, that we still allow these things to continue. We continue to listen to the anti-gunners who say that, well, we have to have stricter laws. There's not a law in the world that would stop someone from carrying out an act like this, right? The only way to deal with force is with force. To stop force, you use force. And the time frame between when the force is done against you to when you have to apply the force back needs to be the shortest time frame possible. And what is the best way to do that? For the victim to be armed and be able to provide force immediately in response to force. That is the only way. What did you... They didn't show up with a book and say, hey, it's against the law to be in here with a gun. It's against the law to shoot people. What did they do? No, they went in and shot the person who was harming their fellow citizens. And it's terrible. I hate to see these types of things occurring. I hate making these videos. I hate doing these types of gun gripes. But how many times are we going to tell people what the solutions to this issue are? And how many times are they going to ignore us? And how many times is stuff going to keep happening before people will actually take the things that we say to heart and understand that we know what we're talking about? It's asinine. I don't understand. But the silver lining, again, is that the police response, really good. Those guys obviously spent some time training together. And I do want to give some good props to, I'm just going to say, the team leader. Now, it didn't seem like they had maybe a super involved rank structure, but here's the thing. The lead guy, let's see, Officer Michael Colazzo, okay? Now, was Officer Michael Colazzo the, lieutenant or sergeant or guy in charge on that particular stick? Maybe not, but you know what he did? He took charge, right? He put his hands on people, told them where to go. He said, hey, you got the rifle. You need to be in front of me, right? You walk in front of your fellow officer, he lowers his muzzle. Their muzzle awareness was good. Their speed and tenacity was good. They maintained their momentum. They communicated with each other. They maintained their lanes. There was a command structure, a command and control. You had Officer Michael Colazzo saying, hey, go right, do this, do that. Like, someone has to take charge. Someone has to take the initiative. And that day, Michael Colazzo took the initiative 110%. Based on what I saw in the body cam footage, I don't think you could have asked for a better response. Definitely a 180 from what happened in Uvalde.
Absolutely. And
I mean, a complete 180.
And that's another reason, too, as you mentioned when we were talking earlier, that's probably why this body cam footage was released so quickly, is because, like, hey, the police wanted to get on top of it, and, like, there's no questions about how they responded to this tragedy.
Good transparency on your part, Nashville. I have to say, that's like, some great transparency.
Tennessee, all right, so some blame game, right? All right. I mentioned earlier, the right wing, okay, pundits, whoever, just people out there are making all, like, conservatives look bad right now, just trying to blame the transgender, movement or transgender people for this. Just like you mentioned, we get blamed. Gun owners get blamed for everything all the time. And right now there's talk about blaming constitutional carry laws. So Tennessee has constitutional carry, right? Georgia just passed it. Several states over the past few years that passed constitutional carry. So the blame is, you can just carry a gun anywhere, and that's why this happened. So are we going to see like a slowdown of constitutional carry laws being brought up and maybe passed in state legislatures, or are we going to see a ramp up to try to get more lax gun laws out there, for people to actually defend themselves and their families and their communities with?
I think what good is constitutional carry if you can't carry where the crimes are occurring? So if schools keep being victimized by shooters, then why aren't the teachers carrying? Why don't we have resource officers in every school? Like, well, you're creating environments where it's just a killing field for these people. So you can't say that it's society at large carrying around a gun with constitutional carry when you don't allow people to carry in schools.
So
like
those kind of laws on the state level are what lead to arming the teachers, and it's not a mandatory thing. It's never been a mandatory thing in the school districts that have passed these kind of laws, right? Or these kind of like bylaws, or whatever you want to call them. If a teacher wants to be armed in school, they have the ability to go through the training and have a firearm on campus, and like everything's covered. Their training is covered, their firearm is covered, the ammunition, the safe storage, all that is covered by the taxpayers. Okay, and I think it's a wonderful thing. You don't have to be a gun person at the school to know that someone there has a firearm that will protect you in the case of something like this happening. And it gives less incentive for these things to happen, right? If all the schools in sensitive locations were covered like this, then I think we'd probably be okay. But going back to what I mentioned earlier, like where do these things start? I think that's where we need to move forward to as a country, is figuring out the root cause of where these actions come from. That's, I think, the biggest thing, and I think it's going to take a huge cultural movement in order to figure that out. And it's going to take both sides coming together and like actually trying to agree on things, instead of the extreme sides just butting at each other's heads all the time and just being extremely bigoted and hypocritical. And look, I want to say something else too. Just because it was a Christian school doesn't mean there aren't bigots and hypocrites there.
That's right.
You can't deny the fact that there are people within religious organizations that are probably the worst people on earth. But there's some of the best people on earth there too, right? So what was this shooter exposed to at that school that made them want to do this? Or was it something they were exposed to outside the school?
Or was it some other series of factors?
Yeah. We have no idea. Like I mentioned, you're trying to, condense someone's entire life into a couple of news articles.
Right.
And like everybody becomes an expert on that person, right?
And
overnight.
news articles that are usually pretty biased.
Absolutely.
And here's the issue with that. You must apply nuance in every situation. And when we look at the nuance of the situation, blaming the tool, like in this case saying, well, we need more gun laws because more gun laws would have fixed this. That's like saying you're a carpenter that builds houses crooked all the time, and it's this dang hammer's fault or the nail's fault. No, it's your fault because you're not a good carpenter. So it's like you can't blame the tool. You have to blame the user of the tool, and you have to figure out what causes them to use the tool in such a negative way. firearms are simply a tool, and they're used for good in a lot of situations. In fact, it was none other than the anti-gun lobby themselves that pushed the CDC to hide defensive gun use statistics. They did that and got away with it, right? So there are lots of reported data that deals in firearms being used for personal protection in a lot of cases, a lot of situations, right? I do want to give a quick shout out to my friend Ryan Petty. You guys might know him as being one of the Parkland fathers, okay? Instead of, doing the typical thing, because Ryan is such a pro-gun guy, he decided to, get involved with the Florida State Board of Education and actually got some programs in place to put armed teachers in the schools in Florida. So that's one thing that Ryan Petty can hang his hat on, that now schools in Florida are much better protected. And again, as Chad mentioned earlier, it's not mandatory. Of course, they're not going to say that a teacher now has to become essentially a soldier or a policeman or something like that. But for situations where, maybe a willing teacher wants to get some training and be a designated marksman, if you will, or designated shooter, they can go get training. And the training that the teachers have to pass is actually akin to air marshal training, which if any of you have ever passed air marshal training, or if you know about the way that air marshals train, it's some of the strictest training and has the strictest and hardest pistol qualification. It's even harder than military pistol qualification or police pistol qualification. It's harder than an FBI pistol qualification. Air marshal training is no joke. It's hard. So it's by that test that they go, hey, if this teacher is about to launch a projectile at high velocity with a bunch of kids in the room, well, think about it. Isn't that like being on a plane, right? Where you have to make that shot count, right? You have to make sure that if you are going to engage a shooter, you don't hit, your students or hits an innocent person, and the stress is on, right? And that's why Air Marshal's pistol certification is so difficult, because they want to make sure that you're not just going to go blindly shooting in a plane full of people or shoot the window out. Now you depressurize the window. So shot placement's extremely important when you're an air marshal, and that's why they use that as their standard for training teachers on marksmanship. Now, is every 9 to 5 teacher going to want to take that type of training or be that designated person? No, they're not, and they don't have to be. There's not a requirement. All we're saying is allow the teachers the ability to receive the training and carry a firearm, or keep the firearm in obviously a locked container, a very well secured location, but that is still easily accessible if they need to get to it. One of the teachers that died in Parkland was a Marine Corps veteran. And guess what? He wanted to save his kids and couldn't because he didn't have a gun. Now, would I have wanted a Marine Corps veteran to have a pistol on that day? You better believe it. Should he? Yes, absolutely should have. But we have these barriers in place that don't allow our teachers to receive the training and resources that they need to protect their students. When Congress is in session, do you ever hear of people going to, Capitol Hill and trying to, walk in the door with a gun and cause some trouble on Capitol Hill when Congress is in session? No, because there's people creeping around with MP5s and M16 that will crawl up you like white on rice, right? So if we protect our congressmen, we protect our banks, our money, are our children not our most precious resource? Why do they not receive the same protection, the same level of care? You're going to send them and put them in the hands of a stranger for 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, and not know what's going on other than the occasional text message, and then, not know that somebody in that school is capable of using force against force that is carried out against your children. Think about how asinine that is. Think about why we still allow that to happen. We know why these things happen. We know the answer. We know the solution. We have the solution on a silver platter here, trying to hand it to you, and just refuse to accept it. And that's not the fault of the gun owner at large. It's not the fault of the tools.
It's just because of a personal mantra on the anti-gunner side that guns are bad, and the only way to get into that utopia society that they dream about is to dispose of all the guns. then we'll all be all right, except for, the people that will still have guns that will try to control every aspect of your life. I mean,
the schools certainly wouldn't be any safer.
No. The big issue is, the politicization of these tragedies on both sides of the aisle. Yeah. And
that was a danger. That was something I didn't want to stand on the fine line of politicizing a situation. That's not what we're attempting to do here. We're trying to apply some nuance. We're trying to look at the middle of the road. We're trying to look at both sides of the scenario and see, we always try to apply nuance in these types of videos.
So the anti-gunners and the left, Biden came out early on. We can avert these tragedies. We need to get these guns off the street. We need to pass an assault weapons ban. I call on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban right now. It's always the case.
Yeah.
So we've explained before, they don't work. The proof is in the pudding. There's plenty of data out there to show that those pieces of legislation are absolute garbage and they do absolutely nothing for public safety. Guns in the hands of people who know what they're doing and have a desire to protect their families, their communities, their schools, the people that they care about, people they don't even know, they still care about them. Those are the people that you want out there. You want them to have guns. And constitutional carry laws are not to blame. Gun owners are not to blame.
That's right.
But the problem is, people are going to politicize it. Far right wingers just, you're already seeing the threads out there on Twitter and Reddit and everywhere else where it's just the anti-transgender hate. And it's so hypocritical. And I hate sometimes to consider myself even a quasi-conservative in some cases. It's embarrassing, to be painted in that picture and have people like that painting that picture of an entire group of people the same way that the side that you disagree with does. And I
don't think generalizations are a positive thing.
No, never.
It's not. It never comes from a position of logic or nuance to apply such a blanket statement to a group of people.
Now,
I mean, that's like saying when you see a crime committed by someone who looks a certain way, that all those people are going to commit the same crime because they look that way. Or, oh, this person that committed this crime was a Muslim, or he was black, or he was white, or whatever. Insert whatever little detractor you can, right? That's like saying that all people that look like that or follow that religion or whatever, right, that they all are going to act that certain way. And that's just simply objectively untrue. Like, you can't generalize people in that way. It's just not a logically consistent way to look at the world. It really isn't healthy.
Yeah, there was a pro-gun bill that was going to be drawn up in the Judiciary Committee and going to be heard or whatever, and that got postponed, a few other things. So likely, pro-gun legislation is probably going to be on the back burner for a little bit. And if any pro-gun legislation comes out, then guess what? All conservatives and pro-gun people are all bigots. That's just usually the case, right? We're all just bigoted individuals. We don't care, about things that happen. I mean, come on. Are you going to see a bunch of assault weapons bans get drawn up in the Senate? Yeah.
Probably.
Are we going to be talking about them in a week or two? Yeah, probably.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same old thing, the same old song and dance.
Each side wanting to pull at the heartstrings of America to try to further their political aspirations is really what it all comes down to in terms of the left to right paradigm, for sure.
America still falls for it. Until we learn how to be like one collective, just Americans. Just accept each other and understand that somebody might not agree with you. But, you may not agree with them. But guess what? You can still live in the same space together. Right?
I know that's a hard idea for some people to accept. Nuance, again, must be applied. And I think that the modern, let's just say modern conservatism, if you will, is probably more centralist in nature. I think that it's your average person who considers himself conservative, probably pretty lax on a lot of things that maybe 20 or 30, 40 years ago, conservatives would have really drawn a negative eye at. And there's still a lot of very hardcore conservatives. They're like, oh, well, we shouldn't legalize cannabis, or, all of these different things that they talk about. But then you've got a lot of conservatives that are like, in fact, a Twitter poll that I just made. Let me pull this poll up real quick. Oh, heck. I just closed that window out. Well, I'll pull it up real quick, Chad, while you're interjecting. But I want to share a Twitter poll with you. Hang on. I'm going to pull it up. It's not exactly related to this, but I think it paints a very distinctive picture. Now, like a lot of the people that follow, my Twitter page, if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure you follow me. It's Iraq Veteran 8888. Just look for me on there. I'm on there. But I like to do Twitter polls. And one of the Twitter polls that I recently posted was about cannabis, right? And I've got a lot of conservative people that follow me on Twitter. I mean, like we're talking 130,000 people. So it's not like a small group of people. Let me scroll down here and
P is stored in the balls.
Well, I wasn't going to go there. But
I never get on your Twitter.
It's probably good that you don't.
Because, frankly, I don't have time.
You probably don't need to.
I just saw that in passing. What?
I'm going
to have to purge that from my memory banks.
Yeah. Look, I get spicy on Twitter, y'all. It's the bottom line. But I wanted to share this poll. Okay, here it is. All right, the question was, if cannabis makes someone's life better and they haven't committed any serious crimes, should simply being a user of it prohibit that person from owning a firearm? All right, so this should just tell you the difference. All right, conservative values and how much they've changed just in the last 10 to 15, 20 years, right? If I would have made this poll 20 years ago, it'd be drastically different. Out of all the people that responded, 6% said that yes, using cannabis should prohibit you from owning a firearm. 94% of respondents said that no, being a user of cannabis should not prohibit you from owning a firearm. There were 11,636 votes. Pretty good pool of data, if I say so myself. That should tell you right there that the tides for conservatism are changing a lot, right? I don't want to get into this subject super hard because that's not what this is about. But it's important to paint the picture that there is not such a stark comparison between left and right anymore. That the middle of the road is kind of where a lot of us are leaning on a lot of different issues. Centralist is kind of like the moral middle ground. It's sort of the logical middle ground. It's sort of like the ground zero where many of us kind of go, okay, maybe in some elements, we're going to be a little bit more right-wing, right? Like, when it comes to guns, yeah, I'm probably more right-wing because I'm super pro-gun. And that's generally considered a right-wing trait. But then I'm also for the legalization of cannabis, which by many circles would put me in the far left category because there's a lot of far right people that would say, oh, well, only a, evil commie would want to, or a hippie or somebody would want to, legalize cannabis. Now, I'm not a user of cannabis. I could care less about it, but I don't think it should be anybody's place to tell you what to do. You see, again, I'm more libertarian in terms of my mindset. So, again, with that being in mind, getting back to the task at hand, when we discuss firearms ownership, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and say that all people that are transgender are somehow evil or terrible or morally bankrupt and that they shouldn't be able to own a gun just because one person commits a terrible act. Generalizations are not healthy for anybody, and I think it's a bad policy for an individual to draw such generalizations about people, especially when it involves a tragic situation like this. And we have to remember at the end of the day, there's families that are affected by this. There's children whose parents are obviously distraught. I mean, there's people who have mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and family members that love them, and now they're not here anymore, and that's terrible, right? Also, the family of the shooter, okay? Obviously, they were deranged. Obviously, they had a terrible time. I mean, it's hard to draw a conclusion like this for some, but I mean, gosh, their family's probably grief-stricken. I mean, one minute, your kid's as normal as they can be, and the next minute they just got shot by the cops because they decided to do something crazy. Imagine what they're thinking. Are they going through the thought process of where did I fail as a parent, right? Did I not love them enough? Did I teach them the wrong thing? Did I not instill enough values and morals and principles in them? Where did I go wrong? So there's a lot of lives that are torn apart when these things happen. But I think the society needs to swallow the red pill and come to the realization that there's cultural problems that are at our doorstep that are not necessarily firearms are only a tiny, tiny component of the entirety of this tragedy. And the major tragedy is cultural.
How many times have we talked about this in the past?
We've tried to tell people. We've been telling people for years.
I know. I mean, you can only beat on the door so long. And it's like, well, I guess they're not home.
Society needs to come to the conclusion that all of the policies that these freaking anti-gunners try to parrot all the time are absolutely crazy and ineffective. Like, that's the bull in the room. Society needs to have the bravery to stand up to these sickos and say, listen, y'all's ideas suck. We're going to try these ideas for a while. Like, we need to listen to these people. You know, like, what is the definition of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Precisely. Right? What result from this situation can we definitively point to and say was a contributing factor to the shooter not going to the first location?
Because this was a soft target with very little resistance to their intended action.
And the other school
was a harder target.
Strict security. Hello? McFly?
I'm telling you, the evidence of that situation is going to be buried in the mainstream media. No one's going to hear about it, and only the fringe groups are going to, try to go anywhere with it, and it won't go anywhere because guess what? Just nowhere for it to go. You get squashed on social media. Well, I mean, except Twitter, really.
Twitter
these days
has been good. I mean, look, since Musk took over, it's been a great platform, and some people would say, oh, it's more toxic now. I don't think it's more toxic.
I think it's more real.
It's more real, right. There's more opinions that might differ from yours, so some people may view that as toxic, but for the open mind, Twitter is an environment where, if you actually do want to consider having your opinion changed by logic, you can hear some opinions that might differ from yours, and you know what? You might come to a conclusion that maybe that person's right and maybe you've been wrong about it, but it takes a lot of courage to admit when you're wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say that the anti-gunners don't want the world to be safe. I think that we really all want the same thing at the end of the day. If you strip away all the politicization and all of the other things, we all want the same thing. It's just the difference is we read history books and we understand human nature and we use a little more logic and we understand the way the world works. And at the end of the day,
I'll say one other thing. We're raising our children in this country, just generalization, not on an individual level, because I know I'm not doing this, but we're raising our children in this country to be entitled, spoiled, rotten, right? Expect everything handed to them, and by raising them that way, and just kind of putting them to the side and ignoring their issues and not spending time with them, quality time, what kind of adults are they going to grow into? They're going to grow into very immature adults who are triggered by the simplest little thing. We see this all the time throughout social media and whatnot. And this stuff really happens. I mean, I go to the store sometimes in just our town and I see people that you're like, how can they think that it's okay to act that way, in public? So they grow up with that same demeanor and they become very immature adults and they can't handle situations. They can't just take a mature standpoint to something. All right, somebody said something mean. Okay.
And?
So? Sticks and stones will break my bones, right? I mean, I've mentioned this in other videos.
Our generation just grew up completely different. I mean, we didn't have that.
But we're millennials, though. We get bashed all the time. And it's like, what are you talking about?
I mean, when I was in school, if you had a problem with somebody, you met out in the dang yard and dealt with it. And you didn't tell nobody. Teachers didn't know. Your parents didn't know. You just dealt with it. And probably the next day, you're probably friends. You probably could just shake and be like, all right, fine, I was wrong. Or admit it, right?
Well,
nowadays,
you can't tell somebody to meet you out by the merry-go-round these days because they don't exist anymore.
Well,
Or the monkey bars. Can't have monkey bars anymore. Can't have a lot of things.
The monkey bars at our school were 14 feet tall. You could break your leg if you fell off of it, and the kids did.
But for real though, the cultural thing and how kids are being raised. I mean, that's a huge factor in this kind of crap happening.
They're popping all these kids full of behavioral medicines. They're handing them an iPad, and they're being raised by an iPad.
Look, they don't have to be popped with a syringe either. Kids, what they eat, water they drink. I mean, you want to go down that road,
Yeah.
buckle in. But like
For real.
the kids are being pumped full of all kinds of crap, and it's not just drugs; it's what we're eating, too.
Growth hormones that they put in the food and all the genetically modified organisms and stuff, the GMOs.
Radio waves, Wi-Fi, 5G.
Where's the tinfoil hat when you
come on? Like look, I'm just saying, but
that's a factor.
There-
Like society needs to understand all the factors that occur with these types of situations. They always want to paint the picture that it's the gun. It's the gun. Oh, it's always the gun. It ain't the gun. It started way before. That gun was just the end of the road, not the beginning. Something led them down that path, and it wasn't that gun. I can promise you that.
Yeah. So
The gun might have been the means to the end, but it wasn't the path that got them there. And that's what society at large is going to have to come to the conclusion. They get to look at the bull in the room hard. They get to fight the bull in the room. That's the bull in the room. Culture. So it's terrible, and I hate it. And I really don't like making these kind of videos. I hate them, but I feel like it's important to put our thoughts out there. It's important for people to understand where you stand on a situation. It's important for people to understand what the real solutions can be. Meaningful, impactful solutions that are based on data and logic and scientific acumen, not just a knee-jerk reaction to an inanimate object. That's not going to help anything. And this is all terrible, and I hate to report these types of things, but I feel like it's important that we put some thoughts out there on it.
absolutely.
And it's important that we remember the families that are affected by these tragedies, and hope that they can find peace and solace, and that they can find a path forward that makes them whole in life, and that they can find their path with their Creator. It's terrible, and there's nothing that I can say that will ease the burden of the situation, that will ease the grief, that will make life better for those people who have been irreparably harmed. Right? There's nothing I can do that will take those actions back. But it is important to recognize that evil as a force is a force that has to be met with force. It's the only way to stop evil. And evil struck that day. Bottom line. It was an evil act carried out by a very disturbed and evil person. And all we can do as a society is try our best to harden our institutions and to protect our children in every way we can. I mean, I know when my grandson is visiting, you better believe ain't nobody going to roll up in my place and hurt my grandkid. I'm gonna meet that with force, right? And I would want an adult who had custodianship of my kid at the time, like a teacher, to have the same force that I would apply at home if I was protecting my kid, to protect my kid when I'm not there. And if we're being honest with ourselves as well, it's a big responsibility to ask of a teacher. Not every teacher should be required or forced in any way to take on that responsibility, because it is a responsibility. You're putting yourself in harm's way.
And let's be honest.
But you're also in harm's way if you're unarmed.
Let's be honest with ourselves, though. Not everybody has the proper mental acumen or, technical know-how, whatever the case is, to handle firearms and use them effectively either.
Right.
So, like, you can't just put a gun into a teacher's hand and expect them to, be John Wick
Of course
or some
not.
nonsense. But
think about how many former police and military ends up going into the education, going into teaching. There are plenty of faculty members at various schools that are more than capable of protecting their students. We just have to be courageous as a society and be like, you know what, enough's enough. We're going to put guns. We're going to put a sign outside that says, hey, shooter, don't come in here because our teachers are going to end you. We protect our students with guns. I know you've seen the signs. Now, what do you think? Which school? There's one school there that's got the signs that says, hey, our faculty's armed and don't try nothing. And then the one across the street that has a gun-free zone sign up. Which area you think the shooters are going to go to? Come on. You know the answer. It's terrible.
And that's the story. That's the story of this gripe is hard target versus soft target.
And it always comes down to that. But it is terrible, and I hate to report it, but we wanted to make this gripe, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope you all, hold your kids close and take care of your kids, and as a parent, as a grandparent, this sucks. I can't imagine the feeling that I would have to lose a child, and no one should have to lose a child. And there are many dangers in our life that we have to contend with. The world is a dangerous place. But there are dangers that we can control a lot closer, right? We put our seatbelts on, right, in case we get in a car wreck, you know. We have insurance in case we get hurt, you know. We lock our doors at night so no one can come in our home. You know, there's all these measures that we put in place to protect ourselves against the evils and dangers of the world. Why should we not extend those same protections to our children? That's the question I pose for you today, and I hope that you'll take that to heart and really understand where Chad and I are coming from on this one. So thank you so much. Many more videos on the way. Again, I really hate to report on tragedy. I don't like discussing this type of stuff, but hopefully we had some silver lining and some sustains that we could pull from this that hopefully will make society a better place if people will just listen to us. That's all we've been asking for, is a chance for people to just listen to us and take what we say to heart and understand that maybe we know what we're dang talking about, okay? We've been trying to tell people for over 20 freaking years, okay? This ain't new. Society needs to get their heads out of their butt and start paying attention to data and statistics and logic and reality. And I think we can come away with a safer place for everybody. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Many more videos on the way. We'll see you soon.